Not sure how much time I have, but I've been trying to figure out what the last couple videos, like couple few, what's different, what's happening. There's something trying to change within me. A year ago, something changed within me, and it's been quite a year. um, but anyway, part of it is that I mentioned in a couple of my other videos, just as like a rhetorical tactic for myself, um, not for the sake of rhetoric, but trying to unearth my version of truth as I know it so far. And trying to bridge the gap between the way I think and hear and the way I speak. And for all of us, like, we have a go-to way of thinking, and we have a go-to way of speaking to other people, even if they're in different parts of the community, right? We speak to our girlfriend different than the way we speak to our mom, than the way we speak to our dad, than the way we speak to our buddy, you know. And it's inconceivable. It's so automatic and like Pavlovianized within the body that we don't even think of it. Kind of like just now I'm thinking about looking at the camera lens, which is just a little dot instead of me in the picture like I always do, so it looks like I'm looking away instead of looking at you. But it's the way we train ourselves to think about things and the way we train ourselves to interact with people. And there are thoughts and dreams that we wouldn't ever imagine speaking aloud to anyone, not even ourselves. But anyway, trying to get closer and closer. And it doesn't always have to be just like weird or spooky or deranged shit. It can be talking about Route 2. Historically speaking, there might be good reasons for that. Or why I'm uncomfortable talking to anybody I know about anything I actually truly am interested in. My interests and everything I talk about on this channel is everything I don't talk about and do in my real life. I virtually never talk about any of this with anybody, nor rarely, if ever, have I ever. That's weird. And that's common. Increasingly less so thanks to the 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 bytes, the bits, the bytes, the gigabytes. This may never touch anyone but me. But even making videos of myself has touched me. Thank you, me. And we should be our own best audience. I remember one time reading in some art mag about how the artist really can only make a piece for one audience. Right? Knowing your audience and knowing the piece of art that you're making for your audience as spoken through you, your message to your audience. Anyway, yeah, so a spinning disc. I was talking about this before. How basically if you take a disc, well, because this is a spinning disc, and this is a rotating or rolling disc. So if you roll it and spin it at the same time, I'm sure I did that wrong, but like if you're rolling it and spinning it at the same time, at the same angle, it will end up at the same place in the beginning. And the shape, if you take one point on that disc as it rotates and spins, so it's spinning and rotating, but 1-to-1. If you do that and just trace one point along that sphere from one perspective, you come up with a yin-yang. And then from another perspective, it looks like a little string theory string, or a little saddle, infinity sign. Or it could look like this, kind of sideways-ish. Or it could look like the, I'm not going to reference this, but the asteroid hypercycloid associated with Ta/4, or I, the imaginary number. Right, but you could rotate at one speed and spin at another speed. So there are all these ratios, and then if you trace that point, what shape does it make? Right? And it reminds me of like electron clouds or electron distributions. I have a very elementary school understanding of chemistry, but I know if I had a really good undergraduate notion of chemistry, I'd be just as behind, right? Because we're understanding the way things work. But then when you look at on the interweb, like the actual shapes of like electron distribution, something totally different. And this type of exercise reminds me of that. And it wouldn't necessarily have to be a spinning disc, but like a very simple object with two parameters, two variable parameters of a it doesn't get much simpler than a circle, spinning and rotating as your two parameters. I would be very challenged to find a more, I'm not saying it's the ground, I'm not saying it's the beginning of things, but what I'm saying is it's a good representation of how you can build a cosmos out of one thing with two parameters and create infinities. Because what that would do within a sphere. And so maybe it's something I'm not saying it's a disk. But what if there really is just an atom? Ah! It's worth considering philosophically that there really is just like one thing, and there's just like maybe two, maybe three, maybe four. I know in physics there's like 60 symbols, all that. But what if that's all boiled down and reduced? It's kind of like when you look at the unicircle, you got the sine, you got the cosine, you got the where sign, you got the the tangent, the cotangent, the this, the that, whatever. There's like 15 different things that's just all measuring one thing, right? And theoretically it could go on and on and on. It's just that's the way it's boiled down in what has been the last couple hundred years of algebra and trigonometry. But, and that's the whole thing with like root 2. I'm not going to really be talking much about like, the secret of root 2 or anything, but like 1, root 2. Root 2 is one of those things that comes up quick, even though the first thing that comes up is 1, 2, 3, and root 3. But most specifically, 1 and root 3. And most specifically, root 3. And root 3 over 2 comma 1/2 and root 3 over 2 comma negative 1/2. So once again, the most common thing amongst those is root 3 and 2. Oh yeah, and 1. But if you were to rotate this disk and spin it, right, the way I'll be doing it, and the way that makes the yin yang is when you have the spin and the rotation as a 1-to-1 ratio. And you could do that in any rational ratio, but you could also do it in an rational ratio, at least theoretically. Whether or not that can be done in space and time could not. I mean, it's a fundamental question. It's a fundamental question. It goes right to the heart of the matter. But what also goes right to the heart of the matter is if we presume that real numbers are, which is a huge presumption, which is why I can't deal with numbers much bigger than 1, 2, or 3. For real. But if you were rotating this at a rate of 1 ta per second, 2 pi, where ta equals 2 pi, so 1 ta, 1 turn, 1 t, 1 turn per second, but you were spinning it at root 2 ta per second. So it would go just a little bit further than a turn, But where the 1 and root 2 are incommensurate, so they say. I don't know that. And it might be worth noting, it might depend on the base system we're using, And I understand that, like, okay, repeating, because there's a difference between like transcendental numbers and which are repeating fractions, but then there's repeat or infinite fractions that are transcendental numbers are non-repeating infinite fractions, kind of, or infinite decimals, whether they be decimals of a base 10 system, or I don't know what would you call a decimal, a point something of a base 12. What would you call that? A dodecim. Dodecimal? I don't know. It doesn't matter, but What if some of the transcendentals could be pared down with either a different base system or a different system of base? But anyway, if you were rotating this and spinning this however you wanted to do it, in any way that had to do with 1 and root 2 or root 2 and 1 or whatever, like, essentially what would be happening is the line that you're tracing would never hit, it would go on forever, in infinity, forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And that tracer point, if it were truly a point, would never, ever, 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 ever hit the same place in the sphere twice, even if its radius were 1. If its radius were 1 and the size of the Planck, whatever the fuck that means, and it had those properties of spin to rotation. So the smallest thing, I wouldn't even say conceivable, because it's inconceivable, a Planck. The hair on my arm, which I can see, is inconceivably small. Never mind the atoms that make it up. Never mind the quarks, this, that, whatever, down. Planck? I mean, forget about it. But even something that size, if it spun, if it had a tracer point, and it spun at 1 ta, or I'm sorry, it rotated at 1 ta, and spun at root 2 ta, or vice versa, if it rotated at root 2 ta and spun at 1 ta, that point, as it traced, because it's always inside the sphere because the center is fixed, that point would never touch. It would cross its own path, so it would touch where it had been, but not in a pass. It will always be an exact point cross. There will never be any length associated with that cross. Get it? It will never touch the same point. It will always be an open infinity. It will always be this unbreachable horizon of untouched points forever and ever and ever, even at the size of a Planck. That's totally inconceivable. And it would create different... Now, if there were lag, so let's say, and that's the whole deal between like a point and an infinitesimal. An infinitesimal is just slightly larger because it's moving. So then you're not just involving the length of a Planck, but also the length of a Planck time or Planck moment. I don't know. It's just that's what people talk about. So hearing a lot about it, we begin to mull it over, and like, even if we don't know the numbers of it, and who does? I'm sure there are those who do, so. But a point moving incorporates a certain Planck time length. So then there are all these very small hairs, these very small lashes. And the evolving patterns that they make over the sphere. If there's that amount of lag time, never mind how fast the things are spinning. But then whatever that lag time is of phenomenological expulsion. People talk about emergence. Maybe expulsion is a better word. Emergence presumes something greater comes from something lesser. Expulsion presumes that the informed greater predecessor superficially, and I mean that technically, not like superficial, but like surface, but beneath that, subficially. That there's been an augmentation beneath the surface because of the feedback loop with the surface and what's above the surface. The universal mind is informed and expresses, but expulses, because it's beyond just an expression. And not expulsion in, like, again, in a much more technical use of the word, not assuming its normal characterizations or connotations. Almost the opposite. But yeah, that's simplest object, two of the smallest numbers that we come in contact with, and then of course this is 1, 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 this is 2, this is root 2. I mean, within a circle and a plus sign cross, it doesn't really get much simpler than that. It gets a little simpler than that. And that little bit simpler is confounding. And people like me would want to blame Descartes for that. Because, it's Cartesian. Because the first thing that comes up if you're dealing with a circle is more like the Star of David thing, and a circle divided into 6, not 4. 4 is a technological advancement. But we take squareness for granted. And we also take squareness as like a given. We give squareness primary status when squareness does not have primary status. Squareness has secondary status. Totally counterintuitive, But even if we're dealing with the earth, because we're always thinking, and I'm a painter, so I'm in the building trade, but like I can't build shit. But you could give me a lump of shit, and I'll put enough caulk and spackle and plaster, this or that, paint it up slick and nice, and you want it flat, you want it shiny, you want sparkles on it, you want to put some veins in it, you want to do this and that with it, I can do that. Or at least in a house painting setting, not necessarily for art. I suppose I probably could make some pretty awesomer art than I've made. Maybe someday I will, but I got other shit to do. 2. And can't remember where I was going with that, so I'm gonna think about it for a second. Foster's Australian for beer. But it's not. My understanding is people in Australia have never heard of Foster's. So what's up with that? But it's got a cool logo. This one's for you, Viheart. Thanks for inspiring. Thanks for inspiring me. I'm sorry I'm way dumber than you. But I appreciate your effort, even in your youth, to democratize and make fun numbers. When I first came upon like Viheart and Numberphile, and yeah, I remember back in that time it was Viheart. It was separate tracks of different things, but like Viheart, Numberphile, was it Boy in a Band? I used to love that guy. And, that was also when I was into Thy Always Seek, an Australian channel, and Dan Wilton. Used to be a big follower of Dan Wilton. I got into Thunderbolts, and that's pretty much when Santos Bonacci came on YouTube. So far as I knew, with his information. Yeah. That was all really good stuff. Since then, my eyes have been opened to more of what's going on, and I learned a little more truth, let's put it that way. And I have taken it very hard. Very, very, very hard. Very hard. I don't know the truth, but my eyes have been opened to a greater truth than the one I knew when I started this channel. And there was a long silence of me not making stuff. And a lot of that had to do with getting through the day when it was very, very, very difficult. I have more difficulties in store, I know. And I've not overcome the difficulties I've been presented with that have to do with me. But as broken as I am, I've become better equipped. And I'm thankful for that. I mean, I'm glad I'm still here. I still want to do some good for this world. Desperately. I think about this shit all day, every day, Not that it's not a badge of courage. I'm the biggest wimp. One, Route 2. Rotating 1 ta, spinning Route 2 ta. Even on the scale of the Planck, creates a point moving on a sphere, and also, might I mention, beautiful harmonies and disharmonies, and cordant disharmonies. And never, ever, 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 ever like touches its own path, retraces its own path, begins the pattern anew. I know I said it never touches the same place twice. It does cross a point, but it never is on a path where it touches two of the same points consecutively. Like, not so much as that. It's always just a point. And it's definitely, I don't believe that as far as exactly as like practically as a physical object. But it's an interesting way of thinking about eternity, God, dynamism. And it's one of the simplest ways to I don't like a lot of the ways that the narrative of the day construes our very existence. And I much prefer anomalies of what might be called classicism. I think classicism is misconstrued. And also, like cosmology or physics, there's a lot of problem with the theory, and there's a lot of problems within the sexiness. As it is currently known. Not that physics ought not be sexy, but that its true beauty, matter washing over formula. So the idea that there's a formula for this form that seems pretty special. And that's kind of why I feel like it's important. I'm not important, and me doing what I'm doing isn't the important thing. But what I see in the things that have come to me, even through the movements of my own hands, as inspired, like, lays a certain foundation, creates a certain context that puts certain things together. And even in like math, right? Math is the queen. The queen. But even in the way, obviously there's an enormous problem with math. And I don't mean it necessarily in the Black Lives Matter way, but I understand what they're saying, but like the attack on science and all this, but it's the narrative. The science is good as it is, the math is good as it is, but the way in which the narrative has informed those subjects is what has distorted them. The narrative's the problem. And the narrative, It depends what we mean by word. So, like, you know, someone of my ilk prefers Noam Chomsky to Bertrand Russell, maybe. So far as the word on the street, you know. Not that I've ever been much into either one of them, but I've heard a shitload, you know. I'm a little bit more of a Whorfian. But Whorfian could be construed toward what might commonly be called either a panpsychic or versus a, like, so you have a lot of times people put, you know, pantheism against theism. It's a false dichotomy, but the same type of thing could be done with Whorfianism, because both what pantheism and theism have in common is that there's something beyond the perception, or, you know, there's something else we can't see. So that they share, that they have in common. And it's the same thing with Whorfianism. It can be put into either camp. Let's put it that way. It can be relative. It can be background dependent or background independent. Right? So yeah, I was going to get into something to do. I got to work backwards now. Worf, Chomsky, things are built, right? Things are built from words. I'm saying there's like geometry, math, or proportions. Depends what we mean by geometry, whether it's a church or an assembly. How we ascribe meaning to shapes, qualitative and quantitative. Can't remember. So the whole thing with the sphere and the spinning and rotating disc, what I was trying to say is that it opens up an infinite cosmos mechanically, or more or less mechanically. It would be very difficult to rationally, purely rationally construct the object which I described simply. Right? I don't even know if it's possible. It might not even be possible to do that. It could be calculated within a certain resolution, for sure, and a lot could be learned from that, but to actually construct it rationally may very well be completely impossible. And I described basically like a very small handful of the simplest numbers and movements in conjunction, or what we call numbers, but in conjunction in some way. And it's inconceivable, and it's infinite, and it could exist at any scale. And I find that a more attractive way of beginning to understand the concept of our own existence, and not in just this like dreamscape. I believe in dreams and in the imagination, but the interior space is not so unlike the exterior space, where we have so much wrong and we have so much better to do. But we shouldn't be too awfully hard on ourselves, in so much as no one else can do this. What we have to do. No one else can do it. No other species, no other, we say this, we say that about aliens, this, that, whatever, but, and, the others and the they, which are here. And goodness knows where else, But if we're capable of waking, we must. We have to.